With UFC 284 just around the corner, the MMA world can't wait for the epic champion versus champion showdown as Islam Makhachev gears up to defend his title against Aussie Alexander Volkanovski. There's a lot of word going around about how Volka will run through Khabib 2.0 to finally put an end to all the hype, but Daniel Cormier thinks differently. He also thinks Jake Paul will actually fight in the PFL. Stay tuned for more. First up, he's too big for him. Islam Makhachev shocked the entire fight world last year at UFC 280 when he submitted the legendary Charles Oliveira to win the lightweight title. We wouldn't exactly call it an upset since Islam was on a roll, but a lot of people, including us, thought Du Bronx would make easy work of the Dagestani. But to everyone's surprise, Makhachev breezed through the fight and put Charles in an epic hold to win the fight in the second round. He's now lined up to take on the featherweight king Alexander Volkanovski at UFC 284 in Perth, in what's looking like the biggest event of the year. It's an epic champion versus champion showdown, as the Aussie has his chance to join the prestigious list of double champions. And despite being significantly smaller than Makhachev, a lot of fighters, including former middleweight champion Israel Adesanya, think Volka will finally put an end to the hype. That's not what Daniel Cormier thinks, though. He thinks the size difference between them will end up being too much for the Aussie. I don't think he wins the fight. I think Makhachev's going to be a little too big for him. It's a valid argument, mainly because Islam is built like the Hulk, and even though he's been knocked out once in his career, he has a chin made of steel. And while we think DC definitely knows what he's talking about, we're not going to count Alexander out just like that. The featherweight champion has been putting in the work and claims he has an answer for the Dagestani's furious striking and elite wrestling. Next, a natural advantage. Considering how the Aussie has pretty much walked through the featherweight division without any real challenge, we think he has a really good shot at taking home the title. But there's just one catch to all of this. Their fighting styles. Volka depends a lot on his agility and Muay Thai focused style, while Islam is more focused on wrestling and high-pressure grappling. Does this mean Khabib 2.0 has a natural advantage over the Aussie? Well, we don't want to be the bearers of bad news, but it's going to be extremely difficult to prevent a takedown. Once Islam gets a hold of you, it's almost impossible to break free. And when you look at how he has a much bigger frame than him, Alexander might just find himself in a bit of trouble. Believe it or not, Cormier actually thinks the difference in their fighting styles gives Makhachev an advantage over Volka, since the Dagestani style is tailor-made to handle his opponent. We kind of agree with that, but we've also been keeping a close watch on Volka's camp, and if you ask us, he knows exactly what to expect. The Aussie knows his opponent's grappling and wrestling are the biggest threat, and that's exactly why he's training with some of the best wrestlers in the world. Plus, he also started camp a few weeks earlier to make sure he's more prepared on the night of action. Honestly, if there's anyone who could cause an upset, it has to be Volkanovski. He's an absolute animal. He has too much heart, and we're pretty sure he'd rather snap a bone before tapping out. Moving on, an upset in the making? Just like us, Cormier is not counting out the featherweight champion. And if he does end up dominating in Perth, how big of an upset is it really going to be? Says he, Volkanovski, does win the fight. How big of an upset is it? Well, we don't think it should count as an upset, because like we said before, if there's anyone who can stop the hype train in its tracks, it's Volka. Also, we're not sure if you've been following his journey, but becoming a double-weight champion is his lifelong dream. Since clearing the featherweight division of all competition, the Aussie has been talking about becoming the first active double champion of the promotion. And in case you don't know what he means by an active double champion, he wants to defend both his titles. Whenever he gets a call out from the lightweight division, he'll just put on a couple of pounds and defend that belt. And if there's an emerging superstar in his native division, all Alexander needs to do is drop a couple of pounds to negate that threat. It's an ambitious plan, to say the least, but considering his will and determination, he's the perfect man for the job. And since opportunities like this are super rare at the UFC, Volkanovski is not taking anything lightly. Former middleweight champion Israel Adesanya claims Alexander has actually been wrestling with him in the build-up to the fight. And what's scary about that is, he has no trouble throwing a giant like Izzy on the mats. Looks like Islam is in for a surprise. Now, size will be a major factor. Like Daniel, UFC lightweight phenom Dustin Poirier also thinks Alexander will struggle because he's not big enough. But like the rest of the fight world, he's not counting him out. When we look back at UFC history, we've seen a lot of talented fighters miss out on gold because of their size. But are all these guys seriously forgetting the fact that Volka has competed in the 170-pound division in the past? And if we're being honest, he looked really good, but since the 34-year-old found the majority of his success in the featherweight division, he prefers to stick to that weight class. Plus, we're not sure if you know this, but Alexander was literally a bowling ball in his early 20s. He used to play rugby, so it's not like carrying all that extra weight and muscle will be new to him. If anything, he's used to it. Former doubleweight champion Conor McGregor thinks that's the secret to beating the Dagestani. He needs to touch the weight limit and be like a bowling ball that just takes Islam with him. Easier said than done, but considering how motivated he is to have the two belts around his waist, there's a strong possibility he'll rock the champion. Notice how almost no one is ready to count him out. Even Islam's coach thinks it's going to be the toughest fight of his career, as he sees the match going the distance with both men putting on a brilliant performance for the fans. It's not just about size now, it's about endurance as well. Following up, Jake Paul is legit. Before we tell you how Cormier reacted to Jake Paul's signing with PFL, we just want to quickly go over what the UFC commentator said about Volka winning the fight. Believe it or not, he thinks it'll be the biggest upset in UFC history, and while we totally understand why he'd say something like that, we're not really sure if we agree. It might be an upset because Makhachev has more advantage, but this is Alexander Volkanovski we're talking about, the king of an entire division. It won't be the biggest upset ever in our opinion, but it will shock quite a few people if it goes his way. Alright, now that that's done, let's jump over to what DC had to say about the problem child signing with PFL. Despite their turbulent history, Daniel thinks the celebrity boxer is for real and didn't just sign with the league for promotion. He's actually going to be taking on real MMA fighters. And even though DC knows the YouTube sensation does a lot of things only for influence, he's for real this time. He's already a professional in the fundamentals of fighting, and considering how he's done wrestling in high school, not only will he fight, but he'll also turn heads inside the cage. If you ask us, we think it's a really good decision because it furthers his cause as a legitimate fighter. But is a collegiate wrestling resume enough to take on stone cold killers? We're guessing only time will tell, as the entire fight world is eager to see his first MMA fight. Up next, no hard feelings. All this coming from DC is really surprising because he and Jake go way back, and we don't mean that in a good way. They've taken jabs at each other in the past and almost got into a physical altercation at UFC 261. But it was only after they started messaging each other did Daniel realize how respectful he is, and it's been nothing but love after that. And while they did squash their beef, DC was still pretty skeptical about whether he's a real fighter. But that too changed when the problem child fought and defeated MMA legend Anderson Silva in an exhibition boxing match last year in October. Cormier also said he has a lot of respect for him because he's very different. Despite being only 25 years old, he knows what he wants. And that's very rare to find in today's generation. And about the whole fighting in the PFL thing, DC was a bit unsure because a lot of boxers claim they're going to do MMA but never deliver. Not Jake though. The former doubleweight champion thinks Paul will live up to his promise as he signed with the PFL to fight and not just promote. Last but not least, a 2-fight deal. It seems like DC's predictions are already coming true, as the problem child has just pitched MMA legend Nate Diaz a 2-fight deal at PFL. The first fight will be a boxing match co-promoted by the League of the Duo meeting for a second time inside the cage. Former middleweight champion Michael Bisping believes their business will not end after a 2-fight deal. Since Jake will win the first fight with Nate dominating him in the second, it's only fair they fight for a third time around as well, right? That's it from our side, folks. So what do you think? Will Alexander Volkanovski be able to cause the biggest upset ever in UFC history at 284? Let us know in the comments below. Remember, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more interesting videos in the future. Thanks for watching, and see you